Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. And my name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
Hello, Steve Lacy. How are you today?
Doing good.
You were gone last week on vacation, and you were out, as I said on the podcast, out in somewhere in the middle of the ocean in a boat with your wife.
That is correct. We were.
How'd that go?
We did great. We did a cruise of the Pacific, Western Mexico, Cabo, Mazatlan, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I just was reading somewhere, I think last week, somebody that did a cruise off of Norway or something. The boat ran into rough waters and they lost power. And a lot of people were injured. Some people talked about it was an experience kind of like the Titanic. Did you read about that at all?
I did not.
Yeah, that was off the coast of Norway, I guess. And so I was talking to Brittany. Brittany and I did the podcast, and we were talking about cruises. And my only thing I've done a couple, but my only thing is, the last few years I read about these people that suddenly there's a mysterious virus that happens, and everybody gets sick. 500 people get sick. But anyhow, obviously, you just got fat and lazy, right?
That was it. Yep.
All right.
Lots of eating. It's hard to stop eating.
Yeah.
So they have 24/7 ice cream machines, self-serve ice cream. And
Great desserts. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the topic of today on our Church Solutions podcast. The topic is, do you know?
Why some churches are not growing.
That's right. Why some churches are not growing. And, we're recording this a few weeks before Easter, and I always used to use Easter as kind of a benchmark to get a lot of things done, to make some changes and just kind of prepare. Because as Brittany and I were talking last week, there's these people called creasters. Do you know what a creaster is?
I think I can figure it out. It's those that come Christmas and Easter, right?
You got it right. And so there's going to be a lot of people that chances are looking, and we went over the stats last week, considering going to church on Easter. And so if you're a pastor or associate pastor or somebody on staff or a key volunteer or a key influencer in your church, I would encourage you to hang around for the next 25 minutes or so, because we're going to talk about some things here that might help you not only for Easter, but long term. And it's true, a lot of churches in America are declining. We've seen those stats. And there are some churches that are doing really well. And I think it's easy sometimes as pastors or as church leaders to kind of get jealous of these other churches and then, make excuses. Well, they're just compromising or whatever, and that's why all the people come. But the truth is, a lot of these groups that are growing are doing some things right. And we need to look at some of those things that they're doing right. So,
right. But we're not talking about that.
Well, not really. We're kind of talking about the opposite of that.
Yeah, we are. We're talking about
why we're not growing. And so let's just jump into it, shall we?
So number one on our list, wanting to stay small.
So there's unfortunately in many groups, many churches, there's a desire within a lot of the people in the church to stay small. So, or at least stay the same size. And so this is a problem because it's an attitude that usually goes unspoken. And quite frankly, I'm working with a church that I'm a part of part-time, and I've seen that attitude. We're only about 100 people, but we're going through some transitions here in the next couple of years, and I'm seeing this attitude kind of pop up a little more. It's becoming more exposed that, hey, we like what we're doing here. We're very happy to be this size. And the problem with that is, you don't set yourself up with a growth environment. And so new people come in, and they kind of get that vibe, even if it's unspoken.
Oh, and it might be a self-sabotage thing too, where it's not spoken, it's not recognized, but there's just things that do happen or don't happen that it's just kind of a self-sabotaging kind of thing.
Yeah. And the result is people reject new ideas, and they freeze out the new people. And new people feel like they can't get involved, and so they don't connect and make friends, and they many times disappear. So, the antidote to some of this stuff as we were bringing in a thought about why some churches are growing, is the antidote to this is I think the leadership has to be willing to embrace growth. And that kind of has to get out there. That needs to be communicated to everybody, from the pulpit as well as the leadership team and volunteers and staff. Hey, we want to grow. We want to welcome new people. We want to expand the music team. We want to expand the tech team. It's work. It's more work to do that,
Right.
but it will help you in the long run.
And what probably goes with this one, and I was just going through our list here. We have the 10 reasons why churches are not growing. And I didn't see this on the list, and that is that churches become inwardly focused.
Mm-hmm.
So that may tie into this want to be small thing. I'm happy. This is great. We're doing really good. Let's continue on and keep our happy crew going, as opposed to being outwardly focused to says let's put stuff together that's going to make people that aren't here yet. Make it appealing for them. So, All right.
Yeah, and all that stuff takes work. All the stuff we're even going to talk about here, it takes some effort.
It takes work, and it's less comfortable too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the outward focused stuff is like, no, I want to do it this way. This has been really good for us.
Yeah. All right. So moving on here, number 2, one of the reasons why many churches are not growing is there's a domination by a few strong members. And I think every church is going to have members that kind of stand out, that are strong members. But I use the word denomination, or what's the word I used here? Domination. Domination. Sorry, I got denomination on the brain, but domination. So I guess when I put this on our little notes here, I see it as almost some ways a bullying thing a little bit. You're always going to have strong members, and that's okay. That's good, as long as they are very much open to a larger vision, open, to reaching people, all that stuff. But unfortunately, some of these people that are just dominating, again, they have this same kind of attitudes, like, hey, we don't want to change anything here. I like the way things are, my way or the highway.
Yeah, and I've had experience with that. We had a small church when we were living in California, and there were a few strong members that rose up, and it was kind of a problem from the pastor, because pastor was ultimately in charge, and he let some of these members grow very influential and strong in the church, and they were not necessarily the spiritual leaders in the church.
True.
And so that led to an eventual split in the church.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that can happen. And so, it's one of those ways. It's hard when you get some of those people. It's really hard, and I don't have an easy answer for that. But that's one of the reasons some churches just are not growing, because there's just 2 or 3 people that just kind of control everything. And all right. So good luck with that. So number 3.
No plan and fear of change. You kind of alluded to this earlier.
Yeah. Again, sometimes, and I used to talk with, I worked with a guy years ago, a wonderful pastor, and he always wanted we want to have a big church, we want to grow, we want to reach people, and it was awesome, but there was no plan to do that, no kind of strategy, no kind of, here's how to get from point A to point B to point C, none of that. And this is very typical in a small church. The vision, if they have one, is very small, or if it is, there's no plan. And then sometimes I put fear of change on here, because sometimes that fear of change is involved in that whole thing about the plan, because, if we're really going to do this, that means we're going to have to change certain things that we do.
Yeah, certain things that have been working really well for our little group.
Yeah.
Right. So it can be a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. So, and again, as we go through this list, some of these are obviously very related and close to each other. You could go on and on. All right. Well, the other one here, that number 4 on our little list of why some churches are not growing, is bad health. And not just bad health of the pastor. I'm talking bad spiritual health of the church here. The church is just unhealthy. And there's all sorts of things going on in the church, lots of things going on. I mean, you can have a small church and have a healthy small church.
Right.
But what we're talking here is just gossip going on.
Right. I guess you could point to the case of my California church because there was
Yeah,
a faction that rose up, and then there was, oh, who are you going to align with? You're going to align with the pastor. You're going to align with these strong leaders, and then there was all this back and forth. They said this, and they did this, and you know, and it became an unhealthy
right.
environment.
Yeah, and there's these groups get segmented, and they're just going to they got their own little thing going on, and it's like I said earlier, a gossip time, and there's just the church is just not healthy. There's just weird stuff going on it's just not a good thing. So when a new person comes in and happens to visit by accident, maybe they sense this. They see it. They sense it. If they come a few times, especially, they begin to sense that something's not healthy here. It's not a good thing here, and they may not be able to put their finger on it, but they can sense it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and you stay small because of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
My experience with we were growing and going to be bringing on staff, and so some of the unhealthy part of it is we're using some finances to drive away. Certain groups didn't want certain people joining the staff, and so they were
Mhm.
kind of sabotaging some financial things, and yeah, it was a big mess. Anyway,
Yeah.
all
Uh,
right.
and again, we're talking about these reasons, and I'm sure some of you are saying, well, what's the solution? How do we fix this? And like, well, it's not easy, but the healthy leadership, if you have some, has to rise up and has to confront some of these issues.
Yeah. And I guess that we're going through the issues, so I guess it's address these issues head on and um, try to do just the opposite. Like, some of our earlier ones wanted to stay smaller, not having a plan. Obvious thing is let's put a plan together. Let's create a vision.
Yeah.
The bad health is probably a tough one to recover from, but you've got to swallow the big pills and make the changes in order to get
Yeah.
healthy again.
Some of that does involve, honestly, some confrontation with the people that are unhealthy and, some changes. And that's not easy. We understand that. We
And,
know that. We've all done
and you
it.
may go backwards for a little while.
Yeah.
Small may get smaller.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's actually okay. Uh, get smaller and hang in there because if you're doing some things right, you will grow. All right. So shall we move on here?
Yes, number 5 on our list.
All right.
Visitors don't feel welcome.
Visitors and guests don't feel welcome. So again, this kind of ties in with some of these other things we're talking about here, like bad health. I mean, somebody walks in the church, there's nobody greeting them, or they sense the vibe, or they
Well,
can't get plugged in.
yeah. Well, a big part of this is the inward versus outward focus.
Right.
And so visitors come in and they see a bunch of cliques of circles of people talking that know each other really well, and it's uncomfortable for them as opposed to having a very outward focused look where you got greeters out front and they're walking people to connect with other people and
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, there's no opportunities, even within the program or announcements, there's no opportunities to say, hey, you know what, we got some things going on and we'd love you to be a part of this. We've got whatever, different teams, different areas of the church that could use volunteers, and none of that is presented. And so you just kind of go there and you sit and you feel this unhealthy vibe and you don't feel welcomed and you don't come back.
Right.
So visitors don't feel welcome. So we really, especially this last church I've been working with the last 5-6 years, I've really worked hard with our team to make sure these people feel welcome when they walk in the door. Don't be off talking about fantasy football somewhere or talking about whatever. Sunday is your time to greet these people. You can get with your buddies during the week or after church, but let's spend some time focusing on some of the newer people and making sure they're comfortable and making sure they feel welcomed. And very, very difficult to change that culture, but it can happen. It just takes a little bit of effort.
All right, number 6.
Number 6, the pastor does almost everything. And I mean, I see this all the time. And quite frankly, when I started a church years ago, for a long time, I was doing almost everything. But as time went on, I was smart enough to begin to hand off things. So if you're starting a church, if you're really small, I understand. You're gonna, the senior pastor is going to do a lot. But there's a time where you have to hand things over to people, even if it's not perfect.
Right.
And yeah, again, it takes energy to do that, because if you hand it over to somebody, that means you got to maybe train them or work with them for a while. And it does take a little more time and energy, but eventually, as that matures, that whole process matures, it will take less off you as a senior pastor, and you won't feel like everything's on you.
All right. And it'll just equip the organization to grow, because you'll develop expertise in different areas and different people, and you'll just be positioned to grow, as opposed to, this kind of ties into Tom Maxwell's leadership-led theory that you'll never rise above your leadership. So
yeah, the level of leadership. Yeah, John Maxwell. Yeah, he's got some really good material. And
John Maxwell, not Tom Maxwell.
Not Tom. You're pulling a
I worked with a Tom Maxwell for too many years, so that's.
Well, John Maxwell has some good stuff. There's lots of other people that have some really good stuff out there as well. And it's you nailed it. You're equipping people, you're enabling people to go forward with things. And there's going to be people that can do something much better than you can, believe it or not. And so handing that over to somebody can get your church to the next level in certain areas. And again, it's maybe this is control. For some people, it's a control issue, and they've got to just release control. For some people, who knows? There's lots of different reasons why the pastor seems to do everything. But in most cases, there's a ceiling. And you might be able to do everything till you're 50, 60 people, maybe 100 people. You can do almost everything, but you'll burn out, and you'll certainly keep the church from growing.
Right. Okay, number 7.
Number 7, no small groups. What do we mean by small groups?
So these are, I don't know, life groups, care groups, small groups. These are groups of typically less than 10 that are meeting during the week outside the service, and ministries happening in these smaller clusters.
Yeah, so, and when we say groups, we're not talking like what we were earlier about gossip groups.
No.
We're talking about specific small groups that have a purpose, and it could be a lot of different things, but usually the purpose is to help people connect, make friends, grow spiritually, go a little deeper. You can't do everything Sunday morning.
Right.
My church has a time where they do some of these small groups, and we call them community groups. And it's a time to really kind of talk a little bit about what we were speaking about Sunday,
right,
and to kind of go a little deeper and give people an opportunity to express their thoughts and how this can help them.
Yeah. And there's known size hurdle points, right, in church growth.
Yeah, there are.
You may know them off the top of your head, but probably 100 is one, right?
Yeah, that's a barrier. Yeah, they call it barriers. Yeah.
Yeah, the barriers. Is it 200 or is it?
It depends, but it can be. It's certainly 200 is a barrier. I know. I mean, they all have they're all certain barriers. I mean, the big ones are getting past 100. Getting past 300 is probably the next biggest barrier. Right. The 500 mark is what people refer to as a barrier.
Yeah, and the reason I bring this up is the small group piece is maybe a key ingredient for getting you past some of these barriers that are beyond the first barrier.
Yes.
So that, you can live and survive at 100, but getting to the 300 mark may require, because people need to be able to connect with someone during the week, then that the pastors, they say that stat from a very long time ago, which all the social media is kind of blows apart, but they basically say that you can actually have relationships with up to 150 people, and beyond that, you really can't have relationships. It's a stat from way back when, but I have 2,000 friends on Facebook.
Yeah, I've heard it's even less than that, but I get what you're saying. You can only have so many friends.
Right. So if you're if the senior pastor's the glue holding the group together, and that's their friends, you need small groups to multiply and be able to grow past these other levels.
Yeah. And this kind of, I don't have this in the notes, but the value of small groups is when you can create those and they're healthy small groups, they have some direction, is that it kind of begins to take the focus off the pastor, and your church doesn't become such a personality driven church, which many smaller churches are. And you can be even 150, 200, and even 300 people and still have a personality driven church. It's no secret that I really enjoy a lot of what Rick Warren has been doing. Some people don't like Rick Warren and all that, but I like the fact that he has some really good systems. And, it's a large church. It's like the 6th largest church in America. And you might think, well, it's Rick Warren. He's written all these books. Of course, it's personality driven. And the thing about it is when he has taken sabbaticals, his son committed suicide a few years ago, and they took a sabbatical for like 3 or 4 months at least. The church continued to do well and continued, I think, even to grow. Mm-hmm. And it's because there was things in place. It wasn't just built on one guy.
Right.
And he's in his 60s now, upper 60s. One of these days he's going to retire. But I'm sure that Saddleback will continue to do well. And again, small groups, and he was always big on small groups as well. Small groups take that focus off the personality-driven pastor, and people begin to make friends, they grow, and they realize, hey, we love our pastors, but we also know that church is much more than our pastor. It's community. It's grown spiritually. It's Jesus. So,
all right, number 8 on our list.
Number 8, we're going through this. Here's the area where we fit in here, where we jump in here. It's called not using technology. Many churches are small because they just are not implementing some technology that could really help them grow.
Right. And this is going to tie into the next one as well, but I think somewhat. But they're not using technology within the service. So as people go to public areas and public events, they're used to certain things, and big screens and music and whatever it may be there, and so churches that aren't embracing the technology are getting left behind.
Yeah, and we're going to do a webinar here. We're calling it what's the name of our webinar? It's centered around
maximizing the impact of Easter.
Something of that name, Easter and beyond. And so we're actually going to do a webinar, which, if you're listening to this podcast, the webinar is going to be April 2nd. And so, just go to streamingchurch.tv and sign up for it. But one of the things I brought that up is because there's some unbelievable stats that we're going to share during this webinar about, people really embracing technology and those kind of things.
And the impact it's had on the church.
It has an impact on the church, and it can impact not only your Easter services, but also beyond that. And, of course, with our company here, we're a company that does streaming video with streamingchurch.tv and mobile apps, churchapplive.com and other things. Technology is so much easier today than it was even 6-7 years ago. And you can really embrace technology in your service. You don't have to have huge screens or anything, but there's things you can do that will perk up your service. And as you mentioned earlier, Steve, people, they're used to using technology, and then not just within your service itself, but again, outside the service with streaming video and having a mobile app. And part of this is the website too. I mean, we would include website. Your website needs to be up to date, which we've hammered on for years. And it's part of the technology. And that's where people are going when they're looking. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look, see if you have video. They're going to look and see if you have audio clips and those kind of things. And when you don't embrace that stuff, or you just do it half-heartedly, you're missing out.
Right, exactly. All right, number 9 on our list.
Yeah. And as you said, this is part of the problem with not embracing technology is we think the reason our church isn't growing is because, we think the culture is the enemy. So the culture today in our society, it's 2019, and it's a different culture than it was in 1980. Technology is part of that culture.
Technology is part of it. And yeah, and maybe I'm old and set in my ways, but it does really, I guess I fall into this trap sometimes because I'm watching, popular TV shows. And the one that comes to mind is, from my culture and the Christian culture and Christian believing culture is kind of the progression is you start dating, then you become engaged, then you get married, and then you buy a house and you have kids, and that's kind of the progression now. And now the norm is you begin dating, then you have sex, and then you have kids, or then you move in together. That's another
Right.
big
Yeah.
step that people need to consider. And then you eventually get married, and it's
Maybe.
presented as the norm. Well, you're dating. Are you ready to take the next step? And they're insinuating, no, the next step, in my mind, I'm going, oh, you're ready to get married. And they're going, no, the next step is move in together. And so anyway, the culture is lost.
Yeah.
But it's not the enemy.
But here, yeah, and here's my point is that when you have people come to your church and maybe they are a couple and they have kids and they're not married, well, okay, that's not what some people would interpret as really being a biblical thing. But look, you want to connect with them. You want to, throwing them out the door or rejecting
Right.
them or just putting up a bad vibe to them, well, you're in sin. Well, okay, but there's a lot of us in sin, just different areas. So why not, embrace them as best you can? And I know I'm not talking about compromising here, but the truth is these people, they're looking for something. If they come to your church, they're looking for answers. And I've seen many, many people in my day come and they've been a part of the church. People loved them and accepted them. And they realized one day, they said, you know what? We should probably get married. We've been living together. We probably should get married. And it's like, great, we'll be glad to marry you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so instead of like making them the dark, evil culture, yeah, it's out there. And you said everything's just backwards now. But let's open up our hearts to these people and love them and speak the truth in love.
Right.
And see what happens. Lots of people will change when they know they're loved and accepted, and when they hear something that applies to their life. That's when people begin to change.
Right.
And so, yeah.
So number 9, we think the culture is the enemy. So I think the culture is lost, but we need to embrace the culture and work with them.
Right.
All right.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get flack for that, but that's okay. I'll take it.
All right. Number 10.
All right. Not caring about the environment. And I don't mean necessarily the outside and, are we doing global warming? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about not caring about the environment of the church. And what I mean by the environment of the church is, well, several things. I mean, one of them, first off, is your facility. Some of you have a facility that's really old. I understand that, but you can still spruce it up a bit. We see that we walk in the same way in my house. Okay. I walk into my house and I'm around my house all the time, and I don't notice the stains on the carpet anymore. I don't notice the paint. There's some chips on the door, the door frames, where we move furniture and bump things and there's marks and stuff. I get used to it. I don't notice it.
Right.
But new people notice it. And new people, when they walk into your facility, will notice a lot of different things. And one of them is your facility. Look, it may be old, but is it clean? Is it, would it be that hard to throw a fresh coat of paint on something? And it's more than just the facility. It can be even your actual services, your worship services, your church services. What's the environment like in your church services?
Right.
Is it anything from hot or too cold? Is it the way you do your church service awkward? Are your announcements way too long that nobody really cares about except the one person that has their announcement in there somewhere? You get what I'm
Right,
where I'm
right,
moving with this?
right. I mean, and people, I mean, especially if you're wanting to grow, I mean, I think about just the restaurant industry. You're outside of a bunch of restaurants. You're gonna typically pick the one that looks clean and safe and familiar,
Yeah.
as opposed to the one that looks like, oh, maybe they have great food, but it looks pretty sketchy. And so
Yeah, yeah, I run into those all the time here. It's a challenge. So anyhow, care about your environment, care about your facility, care about what's going on, and I think you do some of those things, you'll make newer people realize that these people care about what's going on here. I'm going to keep coming for a while. So anyhow, that's the list of stuff, and there's lots more. We'd love to get your feedback on this. We really would. And there's maybe more to add, maybe something you disagree with. A couple things I want to mention though as we wrap up our podcast. One is we are having a webinar, which we mentioned earlier. So if you happen to be listening this before April 2nd, go to streamingchurch.tv. And there should be something on there about our webinar.
And there'll be archives if you missed it, because this may not get published until after that date. So, or around that date, right?
Yeah.
So,
but you can be a part of that. There's going to be Q&A, and a lot of this involves, how you can use Easter and use some things in Easter, and then even go beyond Easter. And then the other thing too, I want to mention too, and again, it's kind of depends on when people hear this podcast or see this video, but we're doing a little special, right? We're doing a little special where if your church wants to stream with us, you've never streamed before, you can go to streamingchurch.tv and make a free trial. And if you set things up and stream, we'll give you a gift certificate, right? Is it a
yes,
gift certificate?
We will. We're looking
lunch,
Chick-fil-A or
Starbucks or something in your area. So, if you want to take advantage of it, or tell a friend, and not to prolong this podcast anymore, but we even have a referral deal where if you tell one of your friends, from a different church to stream with us, we'll give you some cash if they actually stream and do that.
Generous.
So, nice referral. So anyhow, that's enough of our self-promotion there. But hey, we're done here. We're out of time. Look, we'd love to get your feedback. Support@streamingchurch.tv. That's an email you can use. And if we can help your church in any way, that's why we do this stuff. We're a company, but we also have a vision to help churches because we've been doing it for a long time. Both of us here and other people on our staff love the church and want to help you grow as a church and be a healthy church. So I'm done.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So he is Steve Lacy. I'm Phil Thompson. This has been the Church Solutions Podcast. We'll catch you again next time. Take care.